Panels. We all want them if we don't yet have them. It is the bright hope that could lead us out of the energy crisis. But it seems there's a problem in the pipeline. The Institute for Futures Research at Stellenbosch University is estimating that in America, only 1 in 10 solar panels is currently being recycled. The rest ending up in landfills. Now, these panels contain quite poisonous substances such as lead and cadmium. Now, here in South Africa, we're even further behind our American counterparts when it comes to recycling solar panels. I'm joined now by Francois Pretorius, who's a member of the Institute for Futures Research. They are warning we could be facing a solar panel environmental hazard in 30 years' time if we don't act now. Mr. Pretorius, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, I almost didn't want to speak to you because I was like, please, not another problem. But it's a critically important issue that we think today about potential environmental problems that we might cause tomorrow. Currently in South Africa, are any solar panels being recycled?
They are. And the thing is, South Africa is not actually that far behind. It's a global problem. It really, really is. So the thing is, it's the components of solar panels that are being recycled. So in South Africa, we're sitting with certain recyclers can do about 90% of the actual solar panels in being recycled. Then other estimates put it even higher to about 95%. But it's that 5% that's the issue in terms of, you actually touched on it, is just the fact is that's where the toxic substances lie and that's where the difficulty lies. If that ends up in landfill, it could have disastrous consequences.
And also, I suppose, if we don't have proper recycling for solar panels set up, we are going to hit a crunch quite soon, because just in the last year, I would imagine that our purchasing of solar panels has absolutely skyrocketed, and it's not going to stop anytime soon, is it?
No, exactly. I mean, last year it was 2.2 billion rand worth of solar panels were imported into South Africa and installed in homes and all over. And I mean, that's skyrocketing at this stage. The new statistics aren't out yet, but I mean, also with government's intervention on the tax break, it's just going to keep on going. And don't get me wrong, it is a really good intervention. You just need to look further down the line.
So how do you recycle a solar panel?
So it's an interesting one. I mean, it's also, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know all the exact details, but basically from my understanding, all of the main components, in terms of glass, silicone, the aluminium, etc., that's easily recycled. That's not where the difficulty lies. It's with the actual PV cells, that's where the problem comes in. So these PV cells, which are used in the most common solar panels, they require all sorts of different processes, which we don't have the capacity for in South Africa, and it's being either outsourced at the moment or it ends up in landfill, essentially.
Okay, and is that where the cadmium and the lead is found?
Exactly. And that's where the problem lies in terms of if that ends up in landfill and the landfills aren't actually built correctly, which we know can sometimes be a problem as well. And even with correctly built landfills, you still have the risk of contamination. So that can then leak into the soil surrounding the landfills, which goes into drinking water, groundwater sources, which then essentially could wreak havoc on the country's water sources going forward.
You know, I mean, as I alluded at the beginning of the interview, it's tempting for us to just not want to think about yet another problem, let alone a problem that's probably going to hit maybe in 3 decades if we don't recycle our solar panels properly. But that kind of thinking is what got us to acid mine drainage problem in Johannesburg around the mines. The mines, for example, not thinking about radiation coming from all the mining. You've mentioned that the lead and the cadmium can sort of leak into the groundwater. Just could you expand on that a little bit more? And like 30 years down the line, if we do nothing, what kind of problems does it create when you get lead in your water, for example?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you, it's also an interesting one in terms of, I touched on it earlier, it's a global problem. It's a human nature problem in terms of we solve the problems now, and also only think about the problems that could come with it later. I mean, we're looking at that with renewables now in South Africa, etc., non-renewable sources like coal being used and being hopefully phased out. So that's where the problem lies with human nature. I mean, with regards to the lead and the contamination, etc., most of the articles I looked at and researched touch on the fact that water is the biggest issue, and it can wreak havoc with regards to crops, etc. And in the African context, where we're already a water scarce country, and a water scarce zone, this could really have a big effect on agriculture and just human living and development in general.
Now, I want to compare it to coal, because coal, as we know, is dirty energy, and it causes all sorts of environmental problems, pollution. It's affecting the environment, but also, crucially, it affects people's health. There are some real serious health problems from people who live around those coal-fired power stations. If we compare it to the problems that coal creates, is it an absolute drop in the ocean, or could it be fairly significant if nothing is done?
Look, if nothing is done, it's definitely you're dealing with a host of different minerals and elements in here that, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't even understand all of the repercussions that could happen. But it definitely, from a toxicity point of view, it could cause bigger harm, but also it's much easier to contain. If we plan now and act now, and essentially the way I'm looking at it, it provides South Africa an opportunity to actually start really focusing on solar panel recycling and putting the measures in place now so that nothing happens. Also, we can actually then sort of start building the infrastructure to act as the recycling plant for the rest of Africa, because there's going to be big money in solar panel recycling.
This is so true. You mentioned that it's a global problem, but you're right. There's a huge opportunity here to import the right recycling materials. You're saying we just don't seem to have it all set up. Whose responsibility is it? Is it the Department of Environmental Affairs to set up these? Is it something that private companies should get on board with? What is the point of action, and from where should that action come?
Look, it's an interesting one in terms of the legislation. The government has actually heeded the call with regards to this and put legislation in place that essentially what they are doing is they're saying the onus is on the provider of the solar panel at the end of life cycle to get rid of it. So to take it to some facility that is accredited and can do certified panel recycling, which is all good and well. But at this stage, you're sitting with a very small solar panel recycling capability in South Africa. And in 30 years' time, when all the solar panels that we are installing now come to the end of life, that's going to cause a huge, huge problem. So from government, they are looking at it, they are putting legislation in place, but it is being passed on to the private sector at this stage.
So we've got to act now. We've got to get this right. We don't want another problem on our hands in trying to solve the electricity crisis problem. Really fascinating chatting to you. Thank you so much. That, of course, is Francois Pretorius. I knew you said Francois Pienaar. No, he's not a rugby player, as far as I know. Sorry, Francois. And Francois Pretorius is from the Institute for Futures Research at Stellenbosch University, telling us we need to start thinking about how to recycle the lead and cadmium in our solar panels.